Joining us right now is Phil Swagel. He's the director of the Congressional Budget Office. And Phil, let's talk through some of the criticism you've received. Russ Vought said on X that this bill reduces deficits by $1.4 trillion when you adjust for the CBO's one big gimmick, not using a realistic current policy baseline. Carolyn Levitt said that the CBO assumes a long-term GDP growth of an anemic 1.8%, and that's absurd. And then you had President Trump himself saying that the CBO has become partisan and political. That's just a taste of what has been kind of thrown your way. Have you been surprised by the arguments that have been coming from the administration?
Oh, yeah. No, none of this is a surprise in the sense that there's a lot of tension around the bill. There's a lot of attention on it. And, our analysis can matter in some ways for what Congress is doing. So this is just part of the process by which legislation is made. In terms of the criticisms, the baseline that we use is set by statute. And it's completely legitimate for a policymaker or for the administration to say that their narrative is that the current policy basis that the OMB director talked about is the right way to look at it. And we'll provide that information. If members of Congress want a different baseline, well, we can do that. The one that we use is set by statute. So, there is a little bit of a strange thing being criticized for following the law, but that's okay. That I think we all here understand that that's just part of the process.
It's set by statute that is set by Congress. I think this is the Committee on the Joint Committee on Taxation is the one that does that?
This is the Budget Act of '74 as amended sets the way that the baseline is constructed, and that is based on current law. But and we work very closely with the Joint Committee on Taxation, which evaluates some of the tax policy. So the two agencies do that together. Again, the word I've been using lately is narrative, that the way policymakers look at the legislation and look at the effects on the economy and the deficit and the debt is really part of their narrative. And if a member says, well, I don't think these tax cuts should ever expire, well, that's a completely legitimate way of looking at it. And that's their narrative. If a policymaker looks at, say, the revenue from tariffs, and we've evaluated that and said that the revenue from the president's tariffs will basically offset the cost of the tax provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's hard to say that. Well, that's a legitimate way of looking at it also, that those two things offset. So it's narrative, is the way that policymakers look at it is really up to them.
Well, the 1.8% growth expectations for the next decade does sound low if you look just at what we've seen over the last 10 years. I pulled it up, and there's only been 2 times that we saw growth or negative growth that was below 1.8% over the last decade. 2016, it was 1.7%. 2020, with the pandemic, it was down by 2.2%. But aside from that, most of these numbers are well north of 2%. 2.8% last year, 2.9% the year before, 2.5%. 2015 was 2.9% too. Why 1.8%? How do you get that?
Oh, okay. So that number is us looking at the economy, as being, not in a cyclical downturn, as kind of the long-term potential growth. And of course, the U.S. is an amazing place. We have an amazing economy, resilient and flexible. So we have lots of positives. On the other hand, we're an aging society, and that means the demographics of the country are going against us, and the labor force growth is declining. So that's in some sense a drag on the economy. We had a surge of immigration over the past couple of years that led to lots of issues and lots of concerns by policymakers. But it did, in some sense, offset the labor shortage that we had coming out of the pandemic, and that's ended. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. We're looking at the demographics. We're looking at investment in the U.S. and productivity growth in the U.S. We're not dismal. We're not negative on productivity growth. We just don't have the kind of booming productivity growth that the U.S. has seen at some times. So that's why the 1.8% is kind of a middle-of-the-road long-term projection for economic growth.
What do you anticipate from the Federal Reserve? Because after the 2017 tax bill passed, the economy did pick up pretty substantially, 3.0% for 2018, 2.5% for 2019. Some critics will say, well, that was because the Federal Reserve was doing lots of things with quantitative easing around that time, too. What do you think?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, and what you said is absolutely right. And it's really important that the U.S. economy grew pretty strongly in the aftermath of the enactment of the 2017 Tax Act, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that's what CBO projected. So as you said, GDP growth was 3%, and that's actually what CBO projected was 3%. It downshifted a bit. We were actually a little bit over-optimistic about GDP growth and revenues for 2019. And then, of course, in 2020, the pandemic scrambled everything. So we do expect the economy to keep growing in the aftermath of, of whatever happens to the Tax Act, and the Fed will have to react to that. And we don't try to tell the Fed what they should do. That's, of course, up to them. We try to project what they will do, because changes in interest rates feed back into the budget deficit and into debt. And that's really, in some sense, the challenge of the fiscal situation we have, is that the debt trajectory in the U.S. is rising. That will feed back into interest rates, that will feed back into the Fed's decision, and then feed back into the budget. So, that's the challenge that we face, is that debt trajectory feeding back into the fiscal situation.
It is a lot to try and get your arms around, a lot of moving pieces. That's, I suppose, why some people say, well, the OMB is always wrong. I guess it depends on which one of those metrics, which baselines you kind of put into it. Phil, you've been, again, accused of being partisan. You're a Republican.
I am a Republican. You can see over my shoulder that sheet of dollar bills is signed by the Treasury Secretary when I was in the Bush administration. In the Bush Treasury, as in the Bush White House. This is a nonpartisan organization, and we work for the entire Congress. We work for both Democrats and Republicans, the House and the Senate. I have 270 colleagues here who are just focused on the job. And of course, we get things wrong. We get a lot right. We get some things wrong. We're human. We do our best, and we do it in a nonpartisan, professional way.
But Phil, remember the last CBO estimates for the 2017 bill. I know that you have constraints that you work under, but that doesn't mean that it's not sometimes misleading or could be outright. You might not be anywhere near close to what the actual
tax receipts between.
Just talking about, just you had to.
You said it would be 27 trillion. The CBO, not you, but it was $1.5 trillion higher than that between those years. I think some people have gone back and said that was because inflation spiked during the pandemic.
I mean, it's ego, isn't it, Phil? I mean, if you're not sure exactly what to put in, you're not sure exactly what's going to come out. I mean, there is margin. There's room for error. I don't think a lot of the people that love this bill are. I mean, I know they want to get it passed. They want to do what the president wants, but I don't think they're just lying through their teeth about what they expect to happen and why they think the CBO is underestimating some of the positive effects of the growth initiatives that are in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean. Of course, there's uncertainty about the effects of the bill. I look at the 2017 Act, where in the immediate aftermath, the CBO projections were really spot on for 2018 and 2019. And that's both with revenues and with growth. 2020, of course, the pandemic scrambled things. There's lots of legislation. There's very high inflation starting in March of 2021, and that inflated revenues as well. There's the Fed's QE, had an effect on asset prices, and we had a spike in capital gains revenues. There's the immigration surge, and that meant high revenues. And see, these are things that the CBO certainly did not predict back, in 2018.
A lot of things like that. What is the growth? What is your assumption on GDP growth? I think that's what they complain about. What is your assumption for GDP growth?
1.8%.
Yeah, so it's 1.8, about 1.8% now, and that's important to keep in mind that before the bill, and we're putting out a dynamic analysis of the bill that will look at the effects inclusive of the bill, and the challenge that there's some things that will boost GDP growth, the lower taxes, but the higher deficit will go in the opposite direction.
What do the GOP wants you to assume much higher, Phil?
I think that's right. And it's based on not just the bill, but the totality of what the president's agenda is. And he has a deregulation agenda.
And you can't really put that in, right?
We will look at that later in the year, but the score, the dynamic estimate, is just of the bill. So if the president has other pro-growth elements to his policies, we will get that. It just won't be in what we release later this week.
Could it be somewhere in the middle? Would you be absolutely shocked if it underestimated the positive effects?
I mean, there is a range of uncertainty. If the outcome is better than we expect, we will look at our estimates and say, well, what did we miss? And we will adjust it. And, there's really no sort of, no belief that we're perfect. Believe me, we will, we will learn and adjust.